The chandelier cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor of the Meridian Hotel ballroom, each crystal reflecting the soft glow of candlelight that danced over silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Sienna Chun smoothed her emerald dress one final time before stepping into the elegant chaos she had orchestrated for the past 6 months. Tonight's charity gala for St. Catherine's Children's Hospital represented everything she had worked toward since moving to Charleston. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite, their checkbooks ready to open for a cause close to her heart. Have you ever organized a major event in your city or state? There's something magical about bringing people together for a meaningful cause, but tonight would teach Sienna that even the most beautiful gatherings can hide the darkest secrets. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her smile genuine as she greeted donors and thanked volunteers. The months of planning had been exhausting, but seeing the projected fundraising total climbing toward their $500,000 goal made every late night worthwhile. Marcus had been supportive throughout the process, offering his business connections and hosting strategy meetings in their penthouse. His investment firm's name featured prominently on the sponsor wall, and several of his clients had purchased tables at premium prices. The perfect husband supporting his wife's charitable endeavors. That was the story everyone would remember from tonight. Sienna paused near the silent auction display, reviewing the bid sheets with satisfaction. The weekend in Tuscany was performing exceptionally well, as was the private chef experience and the signed sports memorabilia. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. She caught sight of Marcus across the room, his tall frame commanding attention as he spoke with potential investors. Even after 4 years of marriage, he could still make her breath catch. The way his dark hair fell perfectly into place, how his expensive suit emphasized his broad shoulders, the confident smile that had first captured her attention at a similar event in Manhattan. He had pursued her with single-minded determination back then, appearing at her coffee shop every morning until she finally agreed to dinner. The courtship had been a whirlwind of luxury and attention that swept her completely off her feet. A girl from a modest background in Queens suddenly dating a successful investment banker who treated her like a princess. The engagement ring had been massive, the wedding elaborate, and the honeymoon in Europe magical. Marcus had transformed her life into something she never could have imagined. The fairy tale marriage that everyone envied. Sienna's phone buzzed with a text from the catering manager. Problem with the dessert course timing. She needed to discuss the adjustment with Marcus immediately since he was listed as the primary contact for vendor communications. She tried calling his number while walking toward the ladies' room for privacy, but the call went straight to voicemail without ringing. Strange. His phone was usually glued to his hand during business events. She tried again, certain it was a network issue in the crowded ballroom. Same result. Voicemail immediately, as if the phone was turned off or she was blocked. But that was impossible. Why would Marcus block her number? They had exchanged dozens of texts throughout the day coordinating last-minute details. Her chest tightened with confusion as she stepped into the marble-appointed restroom. The space was empty except for Nadia Walsh, a tech entrepreneur who had become a close friend over the past year. Nadia looked up from reapplying her lipstick with a warm smile. I keep getting voicemail when I call Marcus, Sienna said, trying to keep her voice light. It's not even ringing. Is that a network problem? Nadia frowned, pulling out her own phone. Let me check something. She tapped rapidly across the screen, her expression growing serious. Sienna, this might sound crazy, but these symptoms usually mean the number has been blocked. Would you mind if I tried calling him from my phone? That's ridiculous, Sienna laughed, but the sound felt hollow in the elegant space. Why would he block my number? We're married. We organized this entire event together. Nadia's call connected immediately. She ended it before Marcus could answer and turned to face Sienna with troubled eyes. Your husband just answered on the first ring. Sienna, your number is definitely blocked on his phone. I'm sorry. The words hit like a physical blow. Blocked. Marcus had deliberately blocked her number during their own charity event, while they were supposed to be celebrating their shared success and commitment to helping children in need. Her mind raced through possible explanations, each more troubling than the last. Technical error seemed impossible given how quickly Nadia's call had connected. Accident was equally unlikely since blocking required deliberate action in multiple menus, which left intentional. Sienna stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror, seeing her own pale face and wide eyes staring back. The emerald dress that had made her feel beautiful and confident now seemed like a costume for a role she no longer understood. 4 years of marriage, and her husband had blocked her phone number during their own public event. The symbolism was devastating. She was literally unable to reach the person who was supposed to be her closest partner in life. Why would he need to block her tonight specifically? What was Marcus planning that required her complete communication isolation? She thanked Nadia with as much composure as she could manage and returned to the ballroom on unsteady legs. The elegant gathering that had felt like a triumph now seemed threatening and foreign. Every smile directed her way felt false. Every conversation around her potentially discussing secrets she wasn't supposed to know. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, smiling automatically while her mind churned through increasingly dark possibilities. Near the bar, she spotted Marcus deep in conversation with Rachel Stevens, his executive assistant. They stood closer than professional distance required, Rachel's hand resting on his forearm as she spoke directly into his ear. The familiarity between them looked intimate, conspiratorial. Rachel threw back her head and laughed at something Marcus said, her fingers trailing down his arm before finally releasing contact. Sienna felt sick. She had noticed their easy rapport during recent business dinners, the way Rachel always seemed to know exactly what Marcus needed before he asked. The long hours they spent together preparing presentations and attending client meetings. How Marcus's mood always improved after spending time with Rachel, while his interactions with Sienna had become increasingly distant and mechanical. The pieces were forming a picture she desperately didn't want to see. As she watched, Marcus leaned closer to Rachel and spoke quietly. She couldn't hear the words, but she read his lips clearly. Tomorrow night. Everything will be finished. Tomorrow night. What was happening tomorrow night that she didn't know about? And why did the phrase, everything will be finished, send ice through her veins? A hand touched her shoulder gently, and she turned to find a man she didn't recognize standing beside her. He was tall and lean with dark hair and intense green eyes that seemed to see everything. His suit was impeccably tailored, but there was something dangerous about his presence that made her instinctively step back. "Mrs. Chun," he said quietly, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place. "My name is Dante Voloff. I believe you and I need to talk urgently." "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are," she replied, glancing around for security or familiar faces. "This is a private event." "I know exactly who you are," Dante said, moving closer so his words wouldn't carry. "More importantly, I know what your husband is planning. And if you want to live past tomorrow night, you need to listen to me very carefully." The blood drained from her face completely. This stranger knew about tomorrow night. Whatever Marcus and Rachel had been whispering about, this man was aware of it. And he seemed to think her life was in danger. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the classical music and dinner conversation surrounding them. Dante's eyes never left hers as he spoke with calm certainty. "Your husband has taken out a $50 million life insurance policy on you within the past 6 months. He has been systematically establishing an alibi for tomorrow evening while arrangements are being made for your accidental death. The blocked phone number is to ensure you cannot contact anyone when the attack begins." The elegant ballroom tilted around her as the words sank in. $50 million. Life insurance. Accidental death. Tomorrow night. Each phrase felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs and making her legs weak. The man she had loved and trusted for 4 years, the husband who had supported her charitable work and shared her bed, was planning to murder her for money. "You're lying," she said automatically, though everything inside her recognized the terrible truth. This explained Marcus's recent distance, the strange meetings he couldn't discuss, the way he had been encouraging her to update her will and insurance policies. It explained why he needed her unable to contact anyone tonight. He was establishing his alibi while his hired killer prepared to strike. "I wish I were," Dante replied with what sounded like genuine sadness. "But your husband has done this before, Mrs. Chun. This is not his first wife, and you are not his first victim. I can prove everything I'm saying, but only if you trust me enough to listen." Sienna looked across the ballroom at Marcus, who was now laughing heartily with Rachel and 2 other men she didn't recognize. He looked relaxed and happy, like a man without a care in the world, like a man whose biggest problem would be solved in less than 24 hours. The sight of him made her physically ill. For years of marriage, and she had never really known him at all. The man she loved was a stranger who saw her as nothing more than a profitable obstacle to remove. Her perfect life was about to become her perfect death. Dante guided Sienna through the service corridors behind the ballroom, his hand firm but gentle on her elbow as she struggled to process what he had told her. The utilitarian hallways felt like a different world from the elegant party they had left behind, all concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything feel stark and real. Her legs moved automatically while her mind reeled from the impossible revelation that her husband wanted her dead. They entered a small catering office where Dante closed the door and turned to face her with those intense green eyes that seemed to see straight through her shock and confusion. The silence stretched between them as Sienna tried to find words for questions she never thought she would need to ask. "Show me," she said finally, her voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "If what you're saying is true, prove it." Dante pulled out a tablet and began swiping through documents with practiced efficiency. "Insurance policy," he said, turning the screen toward her. $50 million in life insurance purchased 8 months ago through 3 different companies to avoid raising red flags. Your signature, but I suspect you don't remember signing these. Sienna stared at the digital copies of insurance applications bearing her forged signature. The handwriting was close enough to fool casual inspection, but she could see subtle differences in the letter formation that proved these documents were fraudulent. Marcus had been planning this for almost a year, carefully building his financial motive while she remained completely oblivious. The medical records came next, showing a fabricated history of heart problems and fainting spells that would make an accidental death seem plausible. Then photographs of staged car accidents, each one calculated to look like tragic misfortune while ensuring maximum damage to the driver. The attention to detail was terrifying. Marcus had planned her death with the same methodical precision he brought to his investment strategies. "This is his 4th wife," Dante continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact despite the horrific content he was revealing. "Jennifer lasted 2 years before her skiing accident in Aspen. Patricia made it 3 years before her fall down the stairs in their Hamptons house. Monica survived 18 months before her car went off a bridge in Vermont." Each name hit like a physical blow as Sienna realized she was just the latest in a series of murders disguised as accidents. 3 other women had trusted Marcus completely, had shared his bed and believed in his love, only to die when he grew tired of them or needed their insurance money for his next scheme. The man she had married was a serial killer who specialized in murdering his wives. "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's expression hardened with pain that made his dangerous features almost vulnerable. "Because he killed my sister Elena 3 years ago. She was an investigative journalist who got too close to his pattern. They made it look like a robbery gone wrong. But Elena had been asking questions about his previous wives' deaths. She was about to expose him when they silenced her permanently. The personal connection explained why this stranger was risking exposure to warn her. Dante wasn't just some concerned citizen or rival criminal. He was a brother seeking justice for his murdered sister, and Sienna's impending death represented an opportunity to finally trap the man who had destroyed his family. The realization should have made her feel manipulated, but instead she felt a strange sense of relief. At least someone cared enough to try saving her life, even if his motives were partially selfish. "What kind of man are you?" she asked, studying his face for clues about his true nature. "You're not law enforcement, and you're not some random Good Samaritan. How did you get access to all this information?" Dante smiled grimly, the expression transforming his features into something almost predatory. "Let's just say I operate outside conventional legal channels, Mrs. Chun. I have resources that allow me to gather evidence and take action that would be impossible for someone constrained by official procedures. Your husband isn't the only dangerous man in Charleston." The implication was clear. Dante was involved in criminal activities himself, probably organized crime based on his accent and the casual way he discussed surveillance and evidence gathering. Under normal circumstances, that revelation would have terrified her. But sitting in a catering office while her husband planned her murder, the idea of having a dangerous ally felt like salvation rather than threat. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I want Marcus Blackwood dead, Dante replied without hesitation. I want him to pay for what he did to Elena and to all the women he's killed. But I need someone on the inside, someone he trusts completely, to help me gather the evidence and set the trap. You have access to his files, his schedule, his habits. Together, we can destroy him. And if I say no, then you'll be dead by Thursday night, and he'll move on to his next victim within 6 months. I'll keep hunting him, but it will take years to get another opportunity like this. How many more women will die while I gather evidence the slow way? The choice was brutally simple. Trust a dangerous stranger and help him kill her husband, or die in 72 hours and let Marcus continue his murderous pattern with his next victim. When stated so starkly, there was really no choice at all. She couldn't live with herself knowing she had the opportunity to stop a serial killer and chose personal safety instead. Sienna thought about all the times Marcus had encouraged her to take solo trips, especially drives through mountain roads where accidents would seem natural. How he had insisted on handling all their insurance paperwork personally. The way he had been unusually affectionate lately, almost as if he was savoring their final days together. Everything made horrific sense now that she understood his true nature. If I help you, she said slowly, testing each word as it left her mouth, what exactly are you asking me to do? First, we get you somewhere safe tonight. Marcus can't be allowed to proceed with tomorrow's plan, but he also can't know that you're aware of his intentions. We'll make it look like you're following your normal routine, while actually staying in a secure location where his hired killer can't reach you. The mention of a hired killer made her stomach clench with fresh fear. Marcus wasn't planning to murder her personally. He had hired a professional assassin to handle the actual killing while he established his alibi at the charity gala. That level of calculation and detachment made her feel sick. She truly meant nothing to him except money and convenience. Second, you'll help me access his files and communications. I need evidence of the previous murders and proof of his current plan. Third, you'll learn to defend yourself because once we start this war, he'll realize what's happening and try to eliminate both of us. War. The word hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. Sienna had never considered herself capable of violence, but sitting there surrounded by evidence of her husband's planned murder, she felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. Marcus had spent months planning to destroy her life for profit. She was going to return the favor with interest. Teach me, she said, the words coming out stronger and clearer than she felt. Teach me everything I need to know to make him pay. Dante's smile was sharp and approving, like a predator recognizing a worthy hunting partner. We start tonight. But first, you need to go back to the party and act completely normal. Laugh at his jokes. Thank the donors. Play the devoted wife for another few hours. Can you do that knowing what you now know? Sienna thought about facing Marcus across the ballroom, smiling and making small talk while he counted down the hours until her death. The idea should have been impossible, but instead she felt a strange calm settling over her. She was no longer a victim waiting to be killed. She was a hunter gathering intelligence on her prey. Yes, she said with quiet conviction. I can do exactly that. The game was about to begin, and Marcus had no idea his perfect victim was about to become his perfect nightmare. The safe house was nothing like Sienna had expected. Instead of some grim warehouse or abandoned building, Dante had brought her to an elegant townhouse in the historic district that looked like it belonged to a successful attorney or doctor. The interior was sophisticated and comfortable, with expensive furniture and original artwork that suggested wealth acquired through entirely legitimate means. Only the security system by the front door and the weapons cabinet in the study revealed the true nature of its owner. Sienna stood in the living room at 5 in the morning, still wearing her emerald gala dress, but now paired with combat boots that Dante had provided. The contrast felt symbolic of her transformation from charitable socialite to something darker and more dangerous. She had spent the final hours of the party playing her role perfectly, smiling at Marcus and thanking donors while mentally cataloging every detail of his behavior for future use against him. You did well tonight, Dante said, watching her with those penetrating green eyes that seemed to evaluate everything. Most people would have fallen apart or made some obvious mistake that would have tipped him off. But you maintained perfect composure even knowing he was planning your death. I kept imagining his face when he realizes I'm not dead, she replied, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. when he understands that his perfect victim became his worst nightmare. That fantasy kept me calm. Good. Hold on to that anger, but don't let it make you reckless. Marcus has survived this long because he's intelligent and careful. We need to be smarter than him, not just more violent. Dante led her to the basement, which had been converted into a training facility that would have impressed any military instructor. Punching bags, weapon racks, surveillance equipment, and combat mats filled the space. This wasn't some amateur setup. This was a professional facility designed to create killers. First lesson, he said, handing her a pistol that felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Learn to shoot accurately under pressure. If you can't kill when the moment comes, everything we're planning becomes meaningless. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of instruction that pushed Sienna far beyond anything she had ever imagined herself capable of. Dante was a patient but demanding teacher, correcting her stance and grip with clinical precision while she struggled to hit targets that seemed impossibly small and distant. Her hands ached from the recoil, her shoulders burned from holding positions, and her ears rang despite the protective equipment. But gradually, impossibly, she began to improve. The targets that had seemed unreachable became manageable, then easy. The weapon that had felt foreign and terrifying became familiar and comforting. Most disturbing of all, she discovered a natural aptitude for violence that suggested this capacity had always been dormant inside her, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. You're learning fast, Dante observed as she consistently hit center mass on a human-shaped target. Most people need weeks to achieve this level of accuracy. Maybe I'm more like Marcus than I thought, she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Maybe I always had the potential to be a killer. There's a difference, Dante replied firmly. You're learning violence to protect yourself and stop a murderer. Marcus uses violence for profit and entertainment. Motivation matters more than capability when determining what kind of person you really are. The distinction offered some comfort, but Sienna couldn't shake the unsettling realization that she was enjoying the training. Each successful shot brought satisfaction that felt dangerously addictive. Each new technique mastered made her feel more powerful and in control. She was discovering parts of herself that had been buried under years of trying to be the perfect wife to a man who was planning her death. After weapons training came hand-to-hand combat, where Dante taught her to use an attacker's size and strength against them. How to break fingers, rupture organs, and disable opponents who outweighed her by 60 pounds. The techniques were brutal and efficient, designed for killing rather than subduing. Every move he showed her was calculated to end fights permanently. The physical contact during training added another layer of complexity to their partnership. Dante's hands guiding her movements, his body demonstrating proper techniques, the way he caught her when she lost balance during throws. There was an intimacy to learning violence together that created a bond she hadn't expected. He was teaching her to survive, and that level of trust and dependence was intoxicating in ways that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of combat training. By afternoon, they moved on to surveillance and infiltration techniques. How to move through buildings undetected, plant listening devices, copy files without leaving traces, and gather intelligence without raising suspicion. These skills felt more familiar since they built on social abilities she had developed as Marcus's wife. Reading people, manipulating conversations, appearing harmless while pursuing hidden agendas. Tonight, we break into Marcus's office, Dante explained as he showed her how to disable security cameras. I need access to his client files and communication records. You'll be my way in since you have legitimate reason to be in the building after hours. The prospect of burglarizing her husband's office should have terrified her, but instead Sienna felt a thrill of anticipation. She was tired of being passive, tired of having things done to her rather than taking action herself. Tonight she would stop being a victim and start being a predator. They spent the evening hours planning the infiltration with military precision. Building layouts, security protocols, guard schedules, and escape routes were reviewed until Sienna could navigate the office building blindfolded. Dante provided her with professional-grade surveillance equipment disguised as ordinary accessories, and taught her to copy computer files using devices that looked like normal USB drives. The office building felt different at night, all shadows and empty hallways that amplified every footstep and breath. Sienna used her key card to access the executive floor where Marcus maintained his corner office, the space where he had planned her murder with the same casual efficiency he brought to investment strategies. Being there felt like violating a tomb, but she pushed through her discomfort and began methodically searching for evidence. What she found exceeded even Dante's worst expectations. 3 filing cabinets contained detailed records of Marcus's previous marriages, including financial projections showing how much each wife's death had contributed to his net worth. Jennifer's skiing accident had netted him $12 million. Patricia's fall down the stairs brought in $18 million. Monica's car crash yielded $22 million. Each woman represented an escalating payday as Marcus refined his technique and grew more ambitious. But the insurance fraud was just the beginning. Deeper in his files, Sienna discovered that Marcus used the life insurance money to fund a money laundering operation that cleaned cash for human trafficking networks. Her impending death wasn't just about profit. It was about financing the systematic abuse and exploitation of vulnerable women and children. The man she had married wasn't just a serial killer. He was a facilitator of industrial-scale human suffering. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, making her nauseous as she realized the true scope of Marcus's evil. Every charitable event they had attended together, every conversation about helping disadvantaged children, every moment of apparent compassion had been a lie. He spent his days enabling the very crimes their fundraisers claimed to combat. Sienna photographed everything, her hands shaking with rage as she documented the evidence that would destroy her husband and his network of collaborators. Names, dates, financial transfers, and communication records that painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise spanning multiple states and involving dozens of conspirators. This was bigger than one man killing his wives for insurance money. This was organized crime on a scale that could destroy hundreds of lives. A sound in the hallway made her freeze, every muscle tensing as she listened for footsteps or voices that would indicate she had been discovered. But the building remained silent, and she continued her systematic documentation of Marcus's crimes. Each file copied felt like a small victory, evidence that would eventually be used to tear down everything he had built on the bodies of innocent women. When she finished with the files, Sienna planted listening devices in Marcus's office and conference room, tiny transmitters that would allow them to monitor his communications in real time. If he suspected her survival and began planning countermeasures, they would know immediately and adjust their strategy accordingly. The escape from the building went smoothly, but Sienna felt like a different person walking out than she had been walking in. The evidence she carried represented not just proof of Marcus's guilt, but the power to destroy him completely. She was no longer a helpless victim gathering information for someone else's revenge. She was a hunter who had just discovered the full extent of her prey's evil. Back at the safe house, she and Dante reviewed the evidence while sharing takeout Chinese food that tasted like ash in her mouth. The scope of Marcus's crimes made her previous anger seem almost quaint by comparison. This wasn't about one woman's betrayed trust anymore. This was about justice for dozens of victims and preventing future atrocities. "He has to die," she said finally, the words coming out calm and certain. "Not just for what he planned to do to me, but for all of this. A man who enables child trafficking doesn't deserve prison. He deserves execution." Dante looked at her with something like pride and approval. "You're ready for the next phase of your education. Tomorrow we'll focus on close-quarters combat and assassination techniques. Because you're right about one thing. Marcus Blackwood is going to die, and you're going to be the one who kills him." The promise should have horrified her, but instead it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. She was going to become exactly what Marcus had never expected her to be. His perfect victim was going to become his perfect killer. 3 days later, the opportunity came sooner than expected. Dante's surveillance network detected a professional assassin arriving in Charleston, a man with a reputation for making murders look like accidents. Viktor Kozlov was Marcus's solution to the Sienna problem, and his presence meant the timeline had moved up. They had hours, not days, before the attack. Kozlov made contact at a coffee shop near the harbor, a seemingly innocent meeting between strangers that Dante's audio surveillance revealed as a final planning session. The hit was scheduled for that night, when Sienna would be driving home from her evening volunteer shift at the Children's Hospital. A tragic car accident on a winding road. just another grieving widower dealing with unexpected loss. Except Sienna wouldn't be in that car. Dante would be waiting for Kozlov instead, ready to eliminate the threat and send a message to Marcus that his perfect plan had developed fatal flaws. But the ambush went wrong when Kozlov proved more skilled and paranoid than expected. The assassin detected the trap and turned it back on them, cornering Dante in an alley behind the Harbor Warehouse district where police response would be slow and witnesses non-existent. Sienna watched through night vision scopes as the two men fought with lethal efficiency, each trying to gain the advantage that would mean survival. When Dante went down with a knife wound to his shoulder, bleeding heavily and momentarily stunned, Kozlov moved in for the kill. This was the moment that would define everything. Sienna could stay hidden and safe, or she could save the man who had taught her to fight back against the forces that wanted to destroy her. She didn't consciously make the decision. One moment, she was watching from concealment. The next, she was moving through shadows with the pistol Dante had taught her to use. 3 weeks of training condensed into muscle memory as she approached Kozlov from behind, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The assassin never heard her coming. One shot to the back of his head, and Viktor Kozlov collapsed beside the man he had been about to murder. Sienna stood over his body, smoking gun in her hand, and felt absolutely nothing resembling remorse or horror. She had killed a man whose profession was murdering innocent people for money. The world was unquestionably better without him in it. Dante looked up at her with blood streaming down his face and something like wonder in his eyes. "You saved my life," he said, his voice rough with pain and surprise. "You saved mine first," she replied, helping him to his feet while keeping the weapon ready in case Kozlov had backup nearby. "That makes us even." But as they cleaned up the scene and disposed of the body using techniques Dante had taught her during their training, Sienna realized they were far from even. She was falling in love with the man who had transformed her from victim to predator, and that emotional connection was going to make everything infinitely more complicated and dangerous. Marcus still had to die for his crimes, but now she had something to live for beyond simple revenge. She had a partner who saw her true strength and valued her for exactly who she was becoming. Together, they were going to destroy the man who had underestimated them both. Sienna woke in the safe house to the sound of her phone buzzing with messages from Marcus. 3 weeks of maintaining her normal routine while secretly training with Dante had required acting skills she never knew she possessed, but apparently her performance wasn't quite as perfect as she had believed. The messages started casual, asking about her schedule and evening plans, but gradually became more probing and specific. "Where exactly did you go after your volunteer shift last night? Why was your car parked in the historic district when you said you went straight home? Who have you been spending time with lately?" Each question revealed that Marcus was monitoring her movements more closely than she had realized. Somehow her husband had detected changes in her behavior patterns and was investigating. The careful balance they had maintained was crumbling, and Marcus was closing in on the truth about her alliance with Dante. Dante emerged from the kitchen with coffee and a grim expression that confirmed her worst fears. "We've been compromised," he said, showing her surveillance photos on his tablet. "Marcus has hired a private investigator to follow you. These pictures were taken 2 nights ago when you left here after training." The photographs showed her clearly exiting the townhouse where she was supposed to have no reason to be. Her face was clearly visible, and the timestamp proved she had lied about her whereabouts on multiple occasions. Marcus now had evidence that his devoted wife was maintaining secrets that involved meeting strange men in private locations during evening hours. "How long do we have?" she asked, her training taking over as she shifted into tactical thinking mode. "Hours, maybe less. He's probably confronting you tonight, and when you can't provide satisfactory explanations, he'll know you're aware of his plans. We need to accelerate our timeline and force the final confrontation before he can disappear or eliminate us quietly." Sienna felt a cold calm settling over her as she processed the implications. The game they had been playing was about to become open warfare, and she was as ready as she could possibly be for that transition. 3 weeks of intensive training had transformed her body and mind in ways that still surprised her. The frightened woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal at a charity gala had become someone infinitely more dangerous. The plan they implemented was brutal in its simplicity. Sienna would return home and act normally while wearing a wire that would record Marcus's confession when he confronted her. Meanwhile, Dante would position himself nearby with backup, ready to intervene when Marcus inevitably attempted violence. They would gather the final evidence needed for a complete legal case while ensuring Sienna's survival. But Marcus proved more cunning than they had anticipated. When Sienna entered their penthouse that evening, she found him cooking dinner in the kitchen, a scene of domestic tranquility that would have seemed normal 3 weeks ago, but now felt like elaborate theater. He smiled warmly and kissed her cheek, playing the role of loving husband while she played the role of unsuspecting wife. "I thought we deserved a quiet evening together," he said, stirring something fragrant on the stove. "You've been working so hard lately with your volunteer activities. I wanted to do something special for you." The words would have once melted her heart, but now they made her skin crawl. Marcus was performing for her benefit while planning her death with the same casual efficiency he brought to all his projects. Every gesture of affection was calculated manipulation designed to lower her guard before he struck. Dinner was an elaborate production featuring all her favorite foods prepared with the skill that had first impressed her during their courtship. Marcus was an excellent cook when he chose to make the effort, and tonight's meal was a masterpiece of presentation and flavor that would have been romantic under any other circumstances. Instead, it felt like eating her own funeral dinner. Halfway through the meal, Sienna noticed a bitter aftertaste in the wine that made her stomach clench with sudden fear. Poison. Marcus had drugged the wine she was drinking, probably with something that would cause apparent heart failure and make her death look like a tragic medical emergency rather than murder. The realization hit her with crystalline clarity that saved her life. She had been expecting this possibility and had prepared accordingly. While Marcus was getting wine glasses from the cabinet, she had switched their plates using techniques Dante had taught her for surviving assassination attempts. Marcus was now eating the poisoned food he had prepared for her, while she consumed the safe portion he had prepared for himself. The irony was so perfect it almost made her smile. Marcus began showing symptoms within 20 minutes. Confusion, difficulty speaking, and tremors in his hands that he tried to hide while maintaining casual conversation. The poison was working exactly as he had intended, but on the wrong target. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening, and the mask of loving husband finally slipped completely. "You switched the plates," he said, his voice slurred but still carrying undertones of genuine admiration. "How long have you known?" "Since the night you blocked my phone number during our own charity gala," she replied, watching him struggle against the effects of his own poison. "I know about Jennifer, Patricia, and Monica. I know about the insurance fraud and the money laundering. I know about the human trafficking network you've been funding with their deaths. I know everything, Marcus." His laugh was bitter and genuine, the first honest sound she had heard from him in weeks. "You clever little bitch. I actually underestimated you, didn't I? All those months of playing the devoted wife while planning my downfall. I should have killed you immediately instead of trying to be sophisticated about it." The words confirmed everything Dante had told her, while simultaneously revealing that Marcus was fighting off the poison more effectively than expected. His constitution was stronger than anticipated, and he was still capable of violence despite the drugs in his system. This conversation was about to become extremely dangerous. Sienna reached for the pistol concealed in her purse, but Marcus moved faster than his condition should have allowed. He lunged across the table, knocking over wine glasses and scattering food as he tried to grab her throat. The poison had slowed him but not incapacitated him completely, and he was still strong enough to be lethal if he got his hands on her. The hand-to-hand combat training paid off as she used his momentum against him, throwing him over her shoulder and into the marble breakfast bar behind her. The impact stunned him momentarily, giving her time to draw the weapon and create distance between them. But Marcus wasn't finished, and his desperate fury was making him unpredictable and dangerous. "You think you've won?" he snarled, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "You have no idea how deep this goes, or how many people are invested in keeping me alive. Kill me, and you'll spend the rest of your very short life running from forces you can't even imagine." The threat might have terrified her 3 weeks ago, but now it just made her angry. She had learned exactly how deep the conspiracy went, and she was prepared for whatever consequences came from destroying it. Marcus's death was just the beginning of a much larger operation to dismantle the entire trafficking network he had helped build. Before she could respond, the penthouse door exploded inward as armed men in tactical gear stormed into the apartment. For a moment, she thought Dante's backup had arrived, but the weapons pointed at her quickly dispelled that hope. These were Marcus's people, and they had come to clean up the mess their employer had made. Federal agents, the leader announced, though Sienna noticed none of them were wearing proper identification or following standard procedures. This is a crime scene. Drop your weapon and put your hands where we can see them. Corrupt agents, she realized with growing desperation. Marcus had law enforcement officials on his payroll, and they were here to eliminate the threat she represented while making it look like a legitimate operation. She was about to be murdered by people sworn to protect innocent citizens, and there would be no justice or investigation because the killers wore badges. The situation was deteriorating rapidly when Dante's voice came through her earpiece with calm authority. East window in 10 seconds. Trust me and run. Sienna didn't hesitate. She shot out the lights, dove toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, and crashed through the reinforced glass just as Dante's team provided covering fire from the building across the street. The fall to the balcony below was brutal, but her training had prepared her body for impacts that would have crippled her 3 weeks ago. The chase that followed took them through the darkened streets of Charleston, while Marcus's organization mobilized every resource to eliminate the witnesses who could destroy them. Corrupt police officers, private security contractors, and criminal enforcers all converged on their location as Sienna and Dante fought their way toward the only sanctuary they could trust. But even the safe house had been compromised. When they arrived, bullet holes in the windows and blood on the carpet revealed that Marcus's people had found their hideout. Dante's backup team was dead, killed execution style, while trying to defend a position they thought was secret. The townhouse that had been their sanctuary was now a trap waiting to spring. "We're completely exposed," Dante said, checking his ammunition while Sienna treated a graze wound on his arm. "No safe locations, no backup, and half the police force trying to kill us. Marcus has resources we didn't account for, and he's using them all to make sure we don't survive the night. Then we end this tonight," Sienna replied, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. "No more hiding, no more planning. We take the fight directly to him and finish what we started." The revelation of Rachel's true allegiance came through intercepted communications that painted an even more complex picture of the conspiracy they were fighting. Marcus's executive assistant wasn't just helping him murder wives for insurance money. She was reporting their activities to a competing crime family that wanted to take over the trafficking network for themselves. Rachel had been playing all sides, feeding information to whoever offered the best deal. But Rachel's betrayal also provided the opportunity they needed to end the war on their terms. The competing family had Marcus cornered at his private warehouse complex, planning to eliminate him and seize control of his operation. If Sienna and Dante could reach the location first, they could use the confusion of gang warfare to achieve their own objectives. The warehouse district at midnight was a battlefield where multiple factions fought for control of a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus's loyalists defended their employer against rivals who wanted him dead for business reasons rather than justice. Corrupt federal agents tried to contain a situation that was spiraling beyond their control. And in the middle of the chaos, two people who had been written off as victims prepared to claim their revenge. Sienna moved through the industrial maze with lethal efficiency, her training and anger combining to make her more dangerous than anyone expected. She killed Marcus's guards with clinical precision, each shot motivated by memories of Jennifer, Patricia, Monica, and Elena. Every bullet was justified by the children who had been trafficked to fund Marcus's lifestyle. Every death she caused prevented future atrocities. When she finally cornered Marcus in his private office, he was bleeding from multiple wounds and barely conscious from blood loss. The poison from dinner combined with injuries from the gang battle had left him helpless, reduced to begging for mercy from the woman he had tried to murder for money. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the gunfire outside. "I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. I can give you everything I promised when we got married. Just let me live, and we can start over somewhere else." Sienna looked down at the man who had once been her husband, feeling absolutely nothing resembling love or pity. He was a cancer that had destroyed countless lives, and she was about to perform the surgery necessary to remove him from the world permanently. "You already gave me everything I needed," she said, raising the pistol with steady hands. "You taught me exactly what kind of person I was capable of becoming. Thank you for that final gift, Marcus." The shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder, and Marcus Blackwood died knowing that his perfect victim had become his perfect killer. The man who had murdered 3 wives and enabled the trafficking of hundreds of children was finally facing justice delivered by the woman he had underestimated most completely. Outside, the gang war continued, but for Sienna the battle was over. She had achieved everything she came for and transformed into someone who could survive in a world far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of sirens approaching through the industrial district. Sienna stood over Marcus's body, the smoking pistol still warm in her hands, feeling absolutely nothing resembling remorse or regret. The man who had planned to murder her for insurance money was finally dead, but the work was far from finished. His criminal empire still existed, and the people who had enabled his atrocities were still alive and dangerous. Dante appeared in the doorway, blood streaking his face from multiple wounds sustained during the battle with Marcus's security force. He looked at the corpse with grim satisfaction before turning his attention to Sienna with something approaching pride in his green eyes. "It's done," he said simply, acknowledging the completion of a mission that had consumed both their lives for weeks. "Not yet," she replied, stepping over Marcus's body to reach his computer terminal. "The trafficking network is still operational, and Rachel is still alive somewhere in this building. We finish everything tonight, or this was all meaningless revenge instead of justice." The computer files revealed the true scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise in detail that made even Dante whistle softly in appreciation. Bank accounts in 12 countries, shipping manifests for human cargo, communication records with buyers and suppliers, and financial transactions totaling over $200 million in trafficking proceeds. This wasn't just organized crime. This was industrial-scale human suffering turned into profit margins. Rachel Stevens was found in Marcus's private suite, wounded but alive, trying to destroy evidence that would implicate her in the trafficking operation. She looked up at Sienna with desperate hope that quickly turned to terror when she realized who was standing over her with blood-stained clothing and a weapon. "Sienna, thank God you're alive," Rachel said, her voice shaking with false relief. "I was trying to stop Marcus, trying to gather evidence to expose what he was doing. I've been working undercover for the FBI for months, waiting for the right moment to bring him down." The lie was so brazen that Sienna almost laughed. Rachel's own communications were displayed on the computer screen behind her, showing detailed negotiations with rival crime families and plans to eliminate Marcus once he had served his purpose. She wasn't an undercover agent seeking justice. She was a competitor seeking to control the same criminal enterprise for different masters. "You're lying," Sienna said calmly, raising the pistol to point directly at Rachel's forehead. "I've read your messages with the Kozlov family. I know you arranged for Marcus to be eliminated so they could take over his operation. You're not fighting human trafficking. You're trying to monopolize it." Rachel's facade crumbled completely as she realized her deception had failed. Her expression shifted from false innocence to cold calculation that revealed her true nature. "You have no idea what you're destroying," she said, abandoning pretense entirely. "This operation provides services that powerful people demand. Eliminate one supplier, and 3 others will take his place. You're not saving anyone. You're just changing the management structure." The casual way Rachel discussed human beings as commodities made Sienna's decision effortless. This woman had enabled the systematic abuse of children and vulnerable adults while presenting herself as a professional businesswoman. Her death would prevent future atrocities and send a message to anyone else considering involvement in such activities. The shot was clean and quick, Rachel's body collapsing beside her employers as Sienna methodically eliminated the leadership of a criminal organization that had destroyed countless lives. 2 bullets had ended careers built on the suffering of innocent people, and the world was unquestionably better for their absence. Dante was already implementing the next phase of their plan, using Marcus's own computer systems to transfer money from trafficking accounts to legitimate charities focused on helping victims of human abuse. Over $50 million moved electronically to organizations that would use the funds to provide medical care, legal assistance, and rehabilitation services to people who had suffered at the hands of criminals like Marcus. The irony was perfect. Money earned through the systematic abuse of innocent people would now fund their recovery and protection. Marcus's legacy would be measured not by the suffering he had caused, but by the healing his stolen wealth would provide to those he had victimized. But their work was interrupted by the arrival of the corrupt federal agents who had tried to kill them at the penthouse. Agent Morrison and his team entered the warehouse with weapons drawn, expecting to find Sienna and Dante wounded and helpless after the gang battle. Instead, they discovered two killers who had just eliminated the criminal leadership they were supposed to protect. Federal agents, Morrison announced, though his lack of proper identification and aggressive posture revealed his true nature. You're both under arrest for multiple homicides and interference with an ongoing federal investigation. Dante's response was swift and lethal. He had positioned himself behind cover while Morrison was speaking, and his return fire cut down 3 agents before they could react effectively. Sienna followed his lead, using training that had become second nature to eliminate threats with clinical efficiency. These weren't law enforcement officers seeking justice. They were criminals wearing badges, and they deserved the same fate as any other predator. The firefight was brief but vicious, echoing through the warehouse complex while legitimate police sirens grew closer in the distance. Morrison's team had expected easy targets, but instead found themselves outgunned and outfought by people who had spent weeks preparing for exactly this confrontation. Their corruption had made them lazy and overconfident, while Sienna and Dante's mission had made them desperate and dangerous. When the shooting stopped, Agent Morrison was the only corrupt officer still alive, bleeding from a leg wound that had disabled him without killing him immediately. Sienna approached him with the cold calm she had developed over the past month, her transformation from frightened victim to lethal predator now complete. "Who else is involved?" she asked, pressing the barrel of her pistol against his wounded leg. "Which other agents are protecting trafficking operations? Give me names, and I'll make your death quick instead of prolonged." Morrison's confession revealed a network of corruption that extended throughout federal law enforcement in the southeastern region. Dozens of agents, prosecutors, and judges had been receiving payments to ignore or actively facilitate human trafficking operations. The conspiracy was so extensive that legitimate investigations had been sabotaged from within for years. The information Morrison provided would be essential for cleaning up the system, but his usefulness was limited by his impending death. Sienna killed him with a single shot to the head, ending the career of a man who had used his authority to protect predators rather than victims. Justice demanded his death, and she was happy to provide it. By the time legitimate law enforcement arrived at the warehouse, Sienna and Dante had disappeared along with Marcus's computer files and financial records. The scene they left behind told a story of gang warfare that had eliminated multiple criminal organizations simultaneously, saving investigators months of dangerous work while providing them with evidence that would destroy the remaining trafficking network. But Sienna Chun was also gone, disappeared along with any trace of the woman who had once hosted charity galas and believed in the goodness of her husband. The official records would show that she had died in the warehouse fire that consumed the evidence, another victim of organized crime violence who deserved public sympathy rather than criminal investigation. Sofia Volov was born from those ashes, a woman with proper documentation and a substantial bank account who shared Dante's mission to protect innocent people from predators like Marcus. She had skills that made her valuable in a world where justice often required violence that courts couldn't provide. Most importantly, she had found love with a man who valued her for exactly who she had become rather than who she used to be. 3 days after the warehouse battle, Sofia and Dante stood on the deck of a private yacht heading toward international waters. Behind them, Charleston burned with the cleansing fire of a corruption investigation that would imprison dozens of federal agents and destroy the trafficking network Marcus had spent years building. Ahead of them lay a new life built around protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Sienna Chun had been murdered by her husband's greed and corruption, but Sofia Volov had been born from that death with a mission that gave meaning to everything she had endured. She was no longer a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She was a predator who hunted other predators, and she was very good at her work. The war against Marcus was over, but the larger war against people like him would continue for the rest of her life. She had found her purpose in the darkest possible circumstances, and she intended to honor the women who had died before her by ensuring their killer's network could never harm anyone else again. 6 months after the warehouse fire that officially claimed the life of Sienna Chun, Sofia Volov stood in the shadows of a Miami shipping yard, watching her team prepare for a rescue operation that would save 12 young women from a trafficking ring operating out of Eastern Europe. The intelligence they had gathered over weeks of surveillance indicated the cargo container holding the victims would arrive on tonight's freighter, and this represented their only opportunity to intercept before the women disappeared into a network of buyers spread across 3 states. Sophia checked her watch and spoke quietly into her throat microphone, coordinating the movements of 6 highly trained operatives who had become her family over the past months. Each team member was a former victim who had chosen to fight back rather than simply survive. People who understood that sometimes justice required violence that courts couldn't provide. Together, they had dismantled 4 trafficking operations and saved over 60 people from lives of systematic abuse and exploitation. The woman she had become still amazed her sometimes. 6 months ago, she had been a naive charity organizer who believed in the fundamental goodness of people and the power of legal institutions to protect the innocent. That woman had died in the flames that consumed Marcus's criminal empire, replaced by someone infinitely more dangerous and effective at preventing the kind of suffering she had narrowly escaped. Team Alpha, container secured, came the voice of Maria Santos, a former trafficking victim who had become Sophia's most trusted lieutenant. 12 females, ages 14 to 22, all alive, but requiring immediate medical attention. The animals kept them drugged and malnourished during transport. The rage that Sophia felt upon hearing those words was cold and controlled, refined through months of channeling anger into productive action rather than destructive emotion. These criminals had reduced human beings to cargo, treating children like commodities to be bought and sold for profit. Their punishment would be swift and permanent, administered by people who understood exactly what they had inflicted on innocent victims. Sophia moved through the shipping yard with lethal efficiency, her team eliminating guards and traffickers with the clinical precision that Dante had taught her during those first desperate weeks when she was learning to survive. But now she wasn't just surviving. She was hunting, and her prey had no idea they were about to face someone who had transformed trauma into expertise. The leader of the trafficking ring was a man named Alexei Petrov, whose organization had been responsible for moving hundreds of women and children into sexual slavery over the past 5 years. Sophia found him in the shipping office, counting money while 12 human beings suffered in a metal container 50 yards away. The contrast between his comfortable lifestyle and his victim's misery made her decision effortless. Alexei looked up from his cash as Sophia entered the office, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to terror as he realized who was pointing a weapon at his head. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, recognition dawning in his eyes. Sienna Chun died in Charleston 6 months ago. The newspapers covered the funeral. "Sienna Chun did die," Sophia replied calmly, her voice carrying no emotion except quiet satisfaction. "But Sofia Volov was born from those ashes, and she's here to settle accounts for every child your organization has destroyed." The conversation that followed was brief and educational. Alexei provided information about other trafficking operations, supply routes, and the financial networks that made his crimes possible. Not because he wanted to cooperate, but because Sophia had learned interrogation techniques from someone who understood that information extraction was often more valuable than immediate revenge. When Alexei had shared everything useful, Sophia killed him with a single shot that ended a career built on the systematic abuse of vulnerable people. His death would disrupt trafficking operations across the southeastern United States, while sending a message to other criminals that their activities would no longer be ignored by people capable of meaningful retaliation. The rescued victims were transported to a medical facility that Sophia's organization operated through carefully laundered funds taken from the criminals they eliminated. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a trauma specialist who had volunteered her services after learning about their mission, provided both physical and psychological care designed to help survivors reclaim their lives rather than simply survive their experiences. Watching the rescue unfold, Sophia reflected on how much her definition of success had changed over the past months. Once, she had measured achievement through fundraising totals and volunteer participation in charity events that felt meaningful but ultimately ineffective. Now, success meant empty containers that should have held human cargo, bank accounts that would never again fund human suffering, and predators who would never hurt anyone else. The transformation hadn't been without cost. She had nightmares about the people she had killed, even though she knew their deaths had prevented countless future atrocities. She struggled with the violence that had become routine in her new life, even as she recognized its necessity for protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Most difficult of all, she had learned to live with the knowledge that there were always more predators to hunt and more victims to save. But she had also discovered purpose that gave meaning to everything she had endured. Every mission completed honored the memory of Jennifer, Patricia, Monica, and Elena, women who had died because no one was willing to use violence to protect them from Marcus's evil. Every trafficker eliminated prevented future suffering that courts and law enforcement had proven unable or unwilling to stop. The wedding took place on Dante's estate in the mountains of North Carolina, a private ceremony attended only by their team and the few allies they had accumulated during months of underground warfare. Sophia wore a simple white dress that concealed the scars from training and combat, while Dante wore a suit that couldn't hide the predatory grace that made him so effective at hunting criminals. Father Miguel, a priest who had lost his sister to human trafficking and understood why traditional justice sometimes required unconventional methods, performed the ceremony with words that acknowledged both the darkness they inhabited and the light they brought to people trapped in impossible circumstances. The vows they exchanged were promises of partnership in a mission that would consume the rest of their lives. "I take you as my equal partner in war and peace," Dante said, his green eyes holding hers with intensity that made her breath catch. "I promise to value your strength, trust your judgment, and follow you into any battle worth fighting." Sophia's response came from the depths of her transformed soul. "I take you as my partner in justice and love. I promise to match your courage, share your burdens, and stand beside you against any enemy that threatens innocent people." The kiss that sealed their marriage tasted like redemption and possibility. The promise that two people who had been forged in violence could create something beautiful together. They were no longer victims of circumstances beyond their control. They were hunters who had chosen each other and their mission with complete understanding of the costs involved. After the ceremony, Sophia began training the newest member of their team, a 19-year-old woman named Amanda who had escaped from a trafficking ring in Atlanta and refused to simply disappear into witness protection. Like Sophia, Amanda had discovered that survival wasn't enough when you possessed the ability to prevent other people from suffering the same fate. The training session took place in the same basement facility where Dante had taught Sophia to defend herself and strike back against predators who saw women as easy targets. Now she was passing those skills along to someone else who had chosen transformation over victimhood, creating a cycle of empowerment that would multiply their effectiveness indefinitely. "Show me how they taught you to be helpless," Sophia instructed as Amanda practiced defensive techniques. "Then I'll teach you how to make them regret underestimating your strength." As she watched Amanda master the same skills that had saved her own life, Sophia understood that her journey from naive victim to lethal protector represented something larger than personal revenge or individual survival. She had become part of a network of people who refused to accept that evil was inevitable or that good people were powerless against systematic cruelty. How do you think someone transforms from victim to protector? And what does that journey require from people who choose to fight back rather than simply survive? That transformation demands everything from you, but it also offers something no other path can provide: the absolute certainty that your life has meaning beyond personal happiness or individual success. The sun set over the mountains as Sophia completed another day in a life that bore no resemblance to the existence she had planned. Sienna Chun had wanted safety, comfort, and the kind of conventional happiness that people pursued through marriage and charity work. Sophia Volov had something infinitely more valuable and dangerous: She had purpose that justified every sacrifice and love that thrived in the darkness, where most relationships would wither and die. Standing beside Dante on their estate, surrounded by people who had chosen to become weapons against evil, Sophia finally understood what it meant to be truly alive. She had been reborn through fire and blood, forged into someone who could protect the innocent from predators who saw vulnerability as opportunity. The naive woman who had trusted her husband despite obvious warning signs was gone forever, replaced by someone who would ensure that monsters like Marcus could never again destroy innocent lives. Her transformation was complete, but her mission was eternal. There would always be more predators to hunt and more victims to save. Sofia Volov was ready for all of it, and she was no longer fighting alone.